right, we'll go ahead and get this part of the meeting started. First of all, my name is Bruce Michael. I work for Garrett County. I want to thank everyone for taking the time to come out this evening. Certainly appreciate it. This evening's event is to go over the Arrowhead Cove sediment removal project. And if you haven't already, there's a sign-up sheet in the back. Before you leave the meeting tonight, if you'll go ahead and sign up just so we have your name on who attended. There's also some frequently asked questions and a timeline and status about the project handouts in the back of the room as well. That's a hard copy of that. That information is available on Garrett County's website. There's a specific web page designated specifically to the Arrowhead Cove dredging project. The link to that will be on the last slide of the presentation if you want to copy down that link or whatever. So that information will also is available on that website if you need a hard copy. It's in the back of the room. This presentation tonight is being recorded, and that presentation will be on our website, Garrett County website. Most of you know that this project has taken a long time to get to this stage, and we're excited about it. And the only reason it's gotten this far is because of the support for the project from the stakeholders and from property owners. I also want to give a special recognition to Senator Edwards and Delegate Beitzel, who were instrumental in getting the state to actually fund 100% of this dredging project. So they deserve a lot of credit. One of the goals, thank you for them. I'll make sure that they are recognized. One of the goals of the project is to assess the potential impacts of dredging on the lake, both the pros and the cons. This is the first time Deep Creek Lake has ever been dredged. I think you all know it was built in 1925, so it's almost 100 years old. And so we look forward to determining whether dredging will be a viable option for looking at potential other coves that have sediment accumulation in them. I want to introduce a couple people. First of all, Stephanie Lindley in the back. She is Maryland Environmental Service, and she is one of the contractors. The county has contracted out with Maryland Environmental Service to kind of coordinate the project, put the project out to bid. We're in the process right now of putting the contract out on bid. It is out on bid. And then also Mark Remps. He works for Anchor QEA, which is a subcontractor to MES. And both Stephanie and Mark have been involved in the project and many of the reports and the studies that have been done over the past, 5-6 years on this. Tonight's presentation, Mark is going to be presenting basically background on the project itself, a little bit about the history, how and why Arrowhead Cove was selected as the pilot project for the dredging, some details on how the project will be actually constructed, and then what to expect during the project. And again, there's a timeline back there, and Mark will talk about the timeline as well. After the presentation, there will be time for questions, and we're certainly looking forward to hearing any questions that you all have. My contact information, I'll give you that as well. And it's on the Garrett County website. If you have any questions, you can call me directly, somebody that's actually here in Garrett County and working for the county to address your questions and make sure that we keep you informed. Throughout the summer, I'll be giving updates on where we are in the project. Been working with the Property Owners Association. We've been giving updates on the project at the Property Owners Annual Meeting, during the summer and through other avenues. And with that, I will turn it over to Mark to begin the actual PowerPoint presentation. Thank you all very much.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'll ask if you could hold questions until the end. We're going to try to get through a fair amount of information here. I'm hoping I'm going to be answering your questions during the presentation. And feel free, if there's something you're really dying to know, raise your hand. But if you could hold them until the end, that might help. We might be able to answer your questions before we even get to there. So we'll start with a little bit of a site background and purpose. As Bruce mentioned, most of you are familiar with the lake layout, but just for reference, again, the sediment removal area we're talking about is Arrowhead Cove. And for reference, the staging area is on that, the lawn area right adjacent to the inn. We're right in the dead center of the lake, essentially off to the one side, just for reference for people that are trying to understand where we're looking at. And that dashed line represents the footprint of the removal that we're doing inside that cove. As Bruce had kind of mentioned, we've got a long history within this area. We've got, back in 1925 is when the original dam was constructed. 1980 is when DNR took over some of the responsibilities. And then back in 2000 is when DNR actually purchased that lake bottom and took on more responsibility, including the buffer strip. And that was purchased from the hydroelectric facility. Obviously, it's a very large lake. We're about 3,900 acres, roughly, a lot of side coves that we're looking at. And as you all are aware of, it's a very large recreational hub for this area. You've got a lot of use during the summertime, and that's when you've got the higher water levels within the lake compared to the lower water levels within the winter. So the major issue we've got right now is this sediment accumulation. Do we need to pause for anything, or?
No, I'm just trying to get rid of the.
Oh, so you can see a little bit more?
So you can see a little bit more.
So for reference, obviously, sediment accumulation has been ongoing. This was built back in 1925. Your ongoing sources of sediment into the lake is something to be concerned about. But studies really indicated there's a lot of that volume. But right now, the majority of that's accumulated in the southern coves. And it's not actually impacting the lake's ability to function as a lake system, but it does have some of these negative impacts on recreational use and access to a lot of these areas, particularly, again, those southern coves. So how did we get to this particular cove? There's been a study that was performed several years ago. Essentially, DNR had a grant fund, the Waterway Improvement Fund, that was used to look at identifying which cove could be the best first one to take a look at. There's a series of selection criteria. I won't read through all of these, but the bold ones are some of the key ones that are really a big focus on how to select these coves, including safety, getting public boat access, dredging logistics, how could we actually get that sediment out of that footprint? And each of the coves as part of that study were evaluated on a series of point rankings for all of these different criteria. And in looking at how things ranked out, Arrowhead Cove ended up being the end of the eventual selected cove back in the 2016-2017 study. There's a lot more information on this study available. It's on the website. So there will be a link at the end of this presentation, and it's in the information that's provided in the back. So if you have questions on how we got to this point, there's a lot of information available there, but I'll continue on to the rest of the information from here. So how are we actually going to do this sediment removal is a key question we're really getting into next. Mechanical excavation. You might hear us call it dredging, but mechanical excavation is really this target for this project. We're looking at taking out up to 15,000 cubic yards. That may vary a bit depending a little bit on the available budget. We're going to have a bid coming out. That's going to be selected. We may have to adjust that volume slightly, but the target's to up to 15,000 cubic yards. And we're removing that quote in the dry. So we're not excavating this material out of the lake while it's wetted. We want to dry that footprint and make the removal of the sediment easier. Less things to deal with the water leaking off the sediment. It's a little bit cheaper and easier to manage it in this fashion. So as you're very well aware of, they drop the water level down towards the winter time, and that exposes a fair amount of this footprint. So that's an open mud flat. And in part of the area, we also have to dewater as well. So to be able to get this completely dry, we'll be installing a temporary water retention structure, a coffer dam, that will basically protect this area from the rest of the lake, since there'll still be water in the rest of the lake. And we may have storm events, things like that, moving the water around. That'll protect the footprint. We'll pump any remaining water out of that area, and we'll be left with a dry work zone. There are a couple of streams in the area. Those will be diverted around the work area so we continue to work in a dry footprint. And we're removing that sediment. We're not removing a bunch of extra water with that. And then just a kind of a key point, the equipment that's going to be working in that footprint, the requirement of the permitting is that it must be on mat roads. So those are going to be temporary mats. They could be plastic. They could be a wood mat. There's a couple of different options, but essentially they won't be just mucking around actually out in the sediment, tracking that around. They'll be on mats on top of the sediment, working for the entire duration of the work. So a little bit more on the water retention structure. Again, we're going to be holding back some of that lake water. The easternmost portion of the removal footprint does not get fully dewatered, even at that low water condition of the winter. So we're going to be using a temporary structure to hold that water back. There's a couple of different types of these structures. These are just two illustrations. One up the top is like a frame system with basically like a tarp type system on the front. And at the bottom is an illustration of a water-filled bladder. These are systems that are relatively cheaper to install. They can be installed very quickly. A lot of time they're used for flood protection. We're going to be allowing the contractor their options, but essentially these structures will help retain that water out of the work area. And then we just have to manage either stormwater and anything else that kind of leaks through the system a little bit, rather than having to deal with all the sediment in the wet. The sediment removal area, it's about 3 acres in size overall. The yellow area represents the footprint that we're going to be removing within the Cove footprint. The gray bar on the one side is where that temporary dam structure will be placed, just for reference. The removal thickness is anywhere from about 1 to 5 feet, depending on where you're at within that area. We're really targeting trying to get more material, the best bang for our buck while we're out there, but it does vary in elevation out there in the footprint. And the main focus of this removal and the footprint that was developed was one for increased recreational access. You can see the overlays of some of the docks that we'll be capturing and getting allowed a little bit more access to some of these footprints. And we're also capturing material further back towards the creek entrance. That's going to allow material to deposit over the years so that this doesn't continue to occur for a while. We'll be able to allow some of that material to settle out before we get to the rest of the docks, so we can do some of that clean out. And this is also going to increase the wetted footprint over the winter time, which is going to be a little bit more of a habitat benefit and less of that mud flat exposed footprint that you'd be seeing normally. From there, we'll jump to the staging area. So just adjacent to the work, and one of the other reasons that Arrowhead Cove was selected was the availability of the footprint right adjacent to the inn. Most of the footprint's really going to be a stockpile area. So even though the sediment's going to be dewatered prior to the installation, once we get that dam installation installed, it's going to be drying during that entire process. There's still going to be a little bit of water, especially as you get a little bit deeper into that sediment. So as material is removed, it'll be hauled up to the stockpile, placed there. And that stockpile area is going to be graded and drained to a sump, essentially, to collect any remaining water coming off of that. If you ever like scooped up a bucket of sand or whatever, that water that weeps out, we're going to be collecting that, filtering it, and then discharging that back to the lake. So again, that's going to be contained within the stockpile footprint. The access to the lake is through an existing gap. There's actually a space between a couple of trees. So we've got essentially a relatively small impact area cutting through the riparian footprint to get from the upland grassy area down into the lake. Again, we've got we'll have the generator, the contractor trailer, some parking, and the rest of that footprint all in that area. This is an illustration of that footprint. It may change a little bit. We've allowed the contractor some flexibility. They may put the stockpile a little bit closer to one side. They may increase the size, but this just gives it generally a representation of that footprint. And this is the entire extent that they'll be allowed to work in. Entrance and exits we'll talk about here next. So we understand, obviously, traffic has been a big impact to the people that live and work in this area. So what we're working on right now is developing that traffic routing. The anticipation is coming off of Garrett Highway, making a right turn into the property. That way we're not slowing down traffic. We're not trying to cross multiple lanes, safe and easy access coming off that side. And then exiting, we come out onto Glendale, make a right, and then make a left turn onto the highway at the stoplight again. So we're not having trucks crossing a lot of traffic, keeping that relatively simple. There may be some occasional deliveries that may have to break that out depending on which direction they're coming from, but this is the majority of the traffic will be routing this direction. We do know that most folks are aware that Glendale Road has got a lot of construction work ongoing right now. We'll be coordinating with them depending on how that proceeds the rest of this summer. The anticipation is the work out in front of this footprint will be done before we start our work. If for some reason that's lagged, we'll be coordinating with that contractor, understand how the traffic may be adjusted, working again with those guys that are doing that work right out in front. So from there, the sediment reuse. So one of the key things to keep the cost of an overall project down is we don't want to dispose of the material. We don't want to pay a landfill disposal fee. The testing performed on this material, it's clean sediment. It's from this pristine lake. We really have no issues with it, but we need to find a place for it. And earlier on during the design evaluation, we looked at a lot of close options, and that included the landfill that's just a few miles away. Essentially, that landfill needs cover material for their daily operations. And so with this clean material, that's a relatively short haul distance, we can provide a large source of material for them to reuse as part of their daily operations. We don't need to pay a tipping fee. They get a gain as far as providing extra material. And it's material that's very consistent, clean. A lot of times they'll get a lot of borrowed material that may not be as clean or maybe coming from different sources. This gives them a lot of good, clean material that they can use. And they've also got a lot of space. If there's any remaining water with the sediment, they can spread the material out, allow it to dry further as for their needs. From there, so site restoration, we will be doing a couple different features. We've got some in-water restoration, and then we got restoration of the staging area itself. There will be some in-water habitat structures installed along the edges of the dredge area after all that sediment removal. This was a request working with DNR a little bit, but essentially rock clusters will be installed close to the shoreline outside of that boating footprint. These are generally consisting of large boulder structures to a height about 3 feet or so, providing some fish habitat, some places for fish to hide, trying to increase that habitat value. Now that we're deepening this, it'll be wetted throughout the winter. We've got some options for increasing the habitat footprint in this. Eventually, there will also be submerged vegetation installed. That won't be done by this particular contractor. It's something that will come a little bit later in 2024, but that'll be a larger footprint that's expanded out adjacent to some of these areas. And then on the upland side, after we've done all the grading work and we've removed the staging area, that grassy area will be reseeded. And there's actually going to be installation of 20 new trees. The riparian buffer, that tree line is very narrow, and working with DNR, we're looking to increase that tree buffer to provide a little bit more break point between the upland area and the lake itself. So what to expect, obviously, there's a lot of concerns and questions when it comes to what are we going to see during the construction. So from the noise perspective, they have to comply with the noise ordinances, just like any other contractor. The work right now is looking at 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. We're going to be getting into the winter time, so they'll probably be cutting that off a little bit depending on light from that sense. But a lot of the truck traffic is actually going to be ending a little bit earlier because the landfill closes at 3:30. So there may be some additional work done on the site, but a lot of that truck traffic is going to be done by that point, getting that last load out before they're done for the day. From the traffic sense, again, we're going to have some heavy equipment showing up at the start to help build that staging area. Get the excavator, get the loaders, the different pieces of equipment out there. After that, you're primarily going to be seeing dump trucks hauling that sediment from the stockpile area to the landfill. For reference, we're somewhere on the order of maybe 10 to 15 trucks a day running during that period. So you're seeing a couple each hour, just for general reference. And again, that's heading down to the landfill heading south on 219. From the safety sense, we want to make sure that we don't have any issues with the public. So the site's going to be fenced off. Traffic patterns clearly marked. And again, we're looking to do everything we can to make sure that the trucks and other equipment are accessing that site as safely and cleanly as possible with as little impact to the public. And then a question that often comes up when we deal with sediment is odor. So essentially, when you're exposing sediments, there can be a smell and an odor associated with that. We did want to point out it's very similar to what you're dealing with right now. There's really not a lot. And when it's dried out, you lose a lot of that odor generating material. And so as we're drying out, it's going to be similar to how it would be at the very end of the year. And then very little additional as we're actually storing that up and then taking it off site. So pretty typical to what you may see during the regular year. Schedule. Right now, the project's out to bid. And we're actually going to be doing a bid opening at 1 o'clock on Friday. So we'll have a little bit more information at that point. We have to go through at that point, selecting the final contractor, negotiating the contract details, and then developing that final notice to proceed with the contract. That's expected to come later this summer. There is some additional permitting coordination ongoing. We've got most of the major permits, MDE, coordination with DNR. There's a couple of the smaller permits we're still working on. They'll be finalized over the summer. Construction start after Labor Day. Just for reference, that's most likely looking at starting some of the staging area construction. What we're looking at is with the water level dropping after Labor Day, the contractor is expected to start the in-water work a little bit later at. They've got at least a month's worth of work trying to set up that staging area, get their equipment, getting the grading worked out. So it'll be a little bit later after that, but we may start to see some activities after Labor Day. And again, as we get some more information, when we select a contractor, when we get their schedule, there'll be updates as far as when this is going to actually happen that we can provide later on this summer. And just for reference, based on the permits, everything has to be done by March 1st. Everything has to be out of the water, fully complete. So as we get started in the work, we'll be working through the winter time and an equipment pulled at the very latest February 28th. That's the primary work. There will be some more activities in 2024. There's going to be seeding of the staging area. There's going to be that submerged vegetation planting, but the majority of the work's really done this winter. With that, I'll open up with questions.
I suspect you're going to find a lot of wallets and sunglasses.
What's your name? We'll make sure we look for
I
yours.
generally understand where the cofferdam is going to go across just from the map. I'll have to go walk the shoreline up from our place to look at it.
Yeah.
But generally, how deep is the water there on the water side of the cofferdam? Do you know?
It's going to be about 6 feet or so at the deepest point. So it definitely drops down and then comes back up. We looked at a couple options where we located it. There was some coordination trying to work with Brookfield as far as lowering it a little bit further, but where we're at right now, it's going to be a fairly significant fold at that center point. The rest of it shallows up to 1 or 2 feet at the sides, but there is a little bit of a deep portion.
That was my other question. Do you anticipate the lake being dropped more than it typically is?
Not currently.
No.
No. Yes.
Don't say completely no yet on the water level, because we're working like crazy
Okay.
to get the MDE and Brookfield to lower the stupid water.
Okay.
We have Senator McKay and Jim Heimbaugh and Kevin Knoll involved in this.
Yeah.
Because we want the water level to get out every year, so we're fighting like crazy for it.
Okay.
So
I don't know, Bruce, do you want to?
we hope we can do it this year, but you know, don't give up completely on it.
No, we're not, and we're in communication with Brookfield on a regular basis. And obviously that is one of our concerns. Brookfield hasn't been as corruptive as we would like. But as Bob indicated, you know, we were trying to work it out on the technical level. But if we have to take, you know, the senator and delegate and put some political pressure on, we're certainly willing to do that, because it will certainly benefit the project as well as benefiting potentially some of the property owners around the lake.
We're trying to set a meeting up in the next couple of weeks with ourselves, and then go to the MDE secretary.
Okay.
But I did have another question on the coffee. How are you going to handle the ice if we have a good winter and we get, you know, a couple of feet of ice? How are you going to? I don't quite understand how you get wind and ice.
Yeah.
If you do a frame cofferdam, that's liable to just get ripped out like crazy.
We've provided information to the contractors related to that, particularly when it comes to the season. It's up to them to select the equipment, including this cofferdam style. The membrane filled one, the aqua dam, the one that's water filled, that bladder, those hold up a little bit better in some cases. You got that big mass of water and, you know, it freezes inside that container. They're often typically a little bit cheaper than a cofferdam, but they can be tougher to get in some links and things like that. So it's gonna be up to the contractor and they'll have to deal with that. It's in their best interest to protect that footprint because they don't want any of that damage, that reflooding in the work area and all that. So we've got some stipulations in there, information to the contractor, but it's going to be up to them to develop and install a system that protects against that type of impact.
Should have done it last year.
Yeah, it would have been nice.
Thank you.
The drainage that comes under 219 and into the cove.
Yeah.
What are you doing with that?
So that the Arrowhead run will be diverted around the work area. So most of it's going to be gravity fed. So essentially they'll have a border around that, most likely the north side coming around. I won't try to go back too far, but around the north side of the dredge area. So that it's bypassing the work area and keeping that dry. And there's also a very small stream that drains from the south side that they'll also have to manage. But the bigger flow is the Arrowhead run. If there is a major storm event, they may need to pull the equipment out and let it flood and then repump it down. That's just from a safety stake, depending on the sizing, but essentially gravity feed with some additional pumps to help for some regular smaller storms. And that's the approach for that.
What measures will be taken to prevent the sedimentation from refilling the cut?
Part of the reason that we're removing so much back further is to help allow for some of that sedimentation to happen outside of the areas with the impact in the recreational use. Without doing other controls for the stream further upstream, you're a little bit limited to how much is going to come through there. So the idea behind dredging basically further behind the docks that boats really don't access is to provide a little bit of room for that deposition to occur. And that gives you some time until eventually you might need to do a dredging 10 years from now, 15, however long that is. So essentially, because we can't fully control all the sediment coming in, we're developing and leaving an area for that to accumulate over time so that you don't need to worry about it from a maintenance perspective for a period of time. That might be something maybe of DNR's interest as far as additional erosion protection further up the stream to reduce that load, but there's limits to what you do for that. I think before this gentleman did, yeah.
With the construction slated to start in September, do the docks need to come out of the water earlier than typical?
There's going to be some more information and outreach related to that coming this summer. What we intend is to have the contractor start construction of that staging area in that interim period until the October time period, but we're still working on some of that coordination. So we're not requiring it yet. There'll be some more information coming on that later.
Do I understand correctly that you don't dredge so that you cut into the original lake bed? You're just removing sediment? And how do you make that distinction? I'm not.
There was some essentially there was some previous construction, basically some topographic information from before the dam was constructed. And it was used as a guide to develop this footprint. It's old data, so we're not 100% sure exactly, but the design anticipates from the old data that we're just removing.
I guess maybe the real question I have is why does it matter? Is that an environmental question, disturbing the original lake bed, or what's at stake there?
It adds complexity to the permitting process as far as if you're just removing things that's accumulated over time, it's more of a maintenance event versus potentially impacting old resources, things like that. So it's generally easier to get a project permitted to just not do new work and just remove material that's accumulated over time.
You mentioned 10 to 15 trucks per day. Is that trucks or truckloads?
Truckloads.
Okay.
So again, we'll leave it up to the contractor. That might be 4 trucks making several rounds, but it'll vary. If they run a little bit faster, they might increase that. If they take a little longer, it could decrease. That's just a general number. Yes.
The material that is removed to the store pile, how dry will it be?
The main thing that the requirement that the contractor has is it's got to pass what's known as the paint filter test. It's EPA requirement essentially. If you ever had a coffee filter, if you put the material into a coffee filter, you shouldn't have any liquid drain through that filter. So it's got to be dry enough that it can go into a truck, not leak on the hauling transport distance. So it's got to be that dry. In addition to that, just to make sure there's no issues when the material is moved, the contractor is required to either have sealed tailgates or use liners inside the tailgate so that you don't have any leakage from that material. So it's going to be fairly wet when it first comes out. That's why they're going to leave it in a stockpile, allow for some of that additional water to drain. We've also allowed them, if they need to add any amendments, sometimes contractors will add a little bit of Portland cement. There's an option to allow them to help make it a little bit drier to help get it off site faster.
Second question, are there going to be any chemical analysis of the sediment when it is removed to the stockpile and again when it is put in the landfill?
The sediment's already been analyzed. We've got testing that occurred before we developed the dredge prism to understand what the materials looked like. Essentially, we collected 8 different samples that did composites of the entire thickness, and we looked at the results for all of those. It was tested for all of MDE's criteria for the sediment reuse. That includes metals, that includes PHs, PCBs, pesticides, all the rest of those. This material tested clean. It was essentially working with MDE, allowed to be used basically almost anywhere. But the selected use at the landfill was accepted both outside the line footprint, and then the end use eventually is it's placed within the line footprint as that cover. Does that help answer your question? So it's already been pre-characterized. But
Partially.
okay.
There is evidence of some toxic elements in the Beaver Creek Lake in the water and in the sediment. Very limited data, so I understand.
Okay, we're not familiar with that, but unless, I don't know, Bruce, if you heard anything differently on that.
No, we're focusing obviously on the sediment in Arrowhead Cove.
Yeah.
The sampling we didn't find anything, unusual, so.
Yeah, and all this was coordinated again with the Department of the Environment as far as they have a very stringent approval process for anytime you're reusing material, and this is a case of reuse, that you must provide them analytical data, understanding what that sediment may look like. They review that and then approve that final use. So that coordination has recently occurred. They agreed to all those, the reusage, including that storage off the liner and then again back onto the liner itself.
Yeah,
That was with Department of the Environment, Maryland Department of the Environment. And for reference, the Department of Environment's settings, so essentially their levels that they use to control what can be reused, are based off of EPA guidance that's applicable throughout the US.
is that information available?
Yes. Has that been posted previously? The question was, is the sediment data, is that
It hasn't been posted, but if you are interested in it, we can certainly get it to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a report that was done on it. We can give you that report.
That would be nice, thanks.
Sure.
Okay.
Absolutely. Make sure you get a copy of that.
Do you have any other questions? Anyone else?
There's significant utility infrastructure that is near the drying field. What mitigation strategies are in place for protecting that utility infrastructure and dealing with unanticipated outflows from said utility infrastructure?
Particular.
The sewage pumping station.
Oh, okay. So we're adjacent to that. The main limitation here is we're not allowing a significant cut. So most of the work is going to be general grading. Most of that footprint, they might not even really need to do much grading or digging at all to get it flat because it already drains the direction that they want. There is an offset from that station within the staging area. So we're going to be offset from that footprint within the fenced area, and we're not doing significant excavation at that point. I'm not sure if that addresses your question or concern or.
Has there been any permitting that's been sought or approved by the utilities?
Everything associated, if the contractor has to do an excavation, they'll have to do the typical dig safe coordination from there. And there's been no concerns raised to date.
With heavy equipment being mobilized?
Correct. Yeah. There's been no questions raised to date with based on the project. All right.
You also have a question.
Oh, yeah, if there's any
Chat.
Forgot about that.
That he or she raised their hand.
No.
Okay.
Hey, I'm on the Zoom. Can you hear me? I have a question.
Yeah.
Yes.
We can hear you.
Yep.
Oh, great. Awesome. So thank you. This is really helpful. I appreciate the update. Two questions actually is, will this presentation be posted on the Garrett County website or somewhere else we can look at?
Yes.
After?
Yeah. And it'll
Okay.
be that link right there.
Okay, perfect. And then the second one is, if we have a dock, I have a dock that's, I think, in the dredging area, but maybe even if it's not, if we have there's like a dead tree stump, like 4 feet off the dock, is there a way to like put in a request for something to be moved as part of the dredging project?
We typically don't encourage that because that can expand out a lot. If a private owner happens to talk to the contractor, there's one thing there, but essentially we have a limited work area that we can work in based on our permits. So if you're within that area, we may be addressing it already. If we're not, then we're a little bit limited from that sense,
Sure.
but we'll see what we can do. I guess just let us know where the dock is and we'll see if it's in the area.
Thank you.
All right.
So I guess referring to the exposed mud in the off season as if it's a negative ecologically, has that been considered as, even though it's a mud flats, not sightly, it does provide ecological value to other things that aren't necessarily fully aquatic species, but like large groups of migratory shorebirds utilize that type of habitat that's naturally occurring, even on water bodies. We don't manipulate the water level. It's kind of natural that if in the late season, the water level goes down, exposes mud flats.
Yeah.
So is that, I guess, considering that as ecological habitat also, not as necessarily a negative?
I think in that case, that's a great point from that consideration. I think one of the main focuses here was that increase in that submerged habitat. So we are transferring a little bit back to what it was essentially at one point. It wasn't really a historic mud flat. It's something that's accumulated over time. And the intent there was also to increase that submerged habitat and provide a little bit more of that. That's a great point, though. I'm not sure if that came up at all in DNR's conversations initially, but
Again, DNR, Wildlife and Heritage, the Fisheries Service, Resource Assessment, everybody at DNR looked at that, had a chance to comment. And I don't know whether that was an issue. I can certainly go back to their environmental review and see whether they had any concerns about that, but they'll be happy to do that.
yeah, I don't recall it coming up in any
Right.
conversations.
And not to us, but I don't know whether they talked about it. That's a good point that you made.
I think part of that conversation is that obviously there's a recreational benefit, and that's part of how the funding was developed for this. But at least we are providing a secondary improvement to the habitat with installation of some of these features. And with that shallow water zone, we're expecting to see more of that vegetation growth because it can sustain. Now it's going to be fully wetted at a depth for a period of time over that winter time. Like right now, you're not getting into that area because it's exposed, it dies off in the winter. You might be able to see more of that growth in that improvement. So I think if there is a little bit of a trade-off, but at least there is a benefit in one type to still provide this recreational access.
So is any of the like current funding that we have, is any of that going towards, like I know that we discussed creating that extra space for sediment to continue piling up, but is there any investment or any money going into the upstream prevention of continuing sediment loading?
Not associated with this project.
Okay.
Maybe that's something that is going to occur elsewhere. Maybe that's something we can take back as part of this, the information we've gathered here. But for this project, the funding specific to the sediment removal.
And unfortunately, it's a fixed amount of money. There's no new money or whatever, so we have to stay within this budget. There's not going to be a lot left over. And of course, we're waiting to see how the bids turn out. So
If this is a demonstration project, is there a plan for following up to see how fast it resediments, or what are the longer term?
There can be future studies. At this point, I don't think that anything's been funded or evaluated yet, but I think part of the evaluation is going to be, there's going to be some summary reporting at the end of this, understanding a little bit about the cost impact, all the rest of the restoration. So I don't believe there's funding for anything at this point, but that's a great question that maybe we can take back as well.
the Department of Natural Resources has a long-term water quality and habitat monitoring program at Deep Creek Lake. We work very closely with Eric Null and his staff, the lake management staff there, but there is a routine water quality monitoring program. They actually do some continuous monitoring there. There's talk about looking, and again, they've had, monitor in Arrowhead Cove. Recommendation is to work with the department and continue to monitor the lake as well as Arrowhead Cove.
I guess related to some of these questions, so we've often called this a pilot. Is there a pilot, a postmortem pilot assessment plan in place with funding to accomplish that?
Again, I'll defer. I don't think there's funding resolved yet, but correct me if I'm
There's
wrong.
no additional funding to, do, thorough study. We're basically going to look at what we've got, see how the project works, and we'll evaluate, some of those criteria that was used to actually select Arrowhead Cove as
So there's
the
a plan to
project.
go back to the selection criteria. Give a score or something.
Yeah, there'll be some summary information, but it's, a further study longer term. It's not been funded at this time.
Right.
What is the budget for the project? Since you brought it up.
The state was allocated for this particular portion of the project, $2.2 million for it. And of course, that didn't include the funding that was done for some of the previous studies that we talked about. But right now we have $2.2 million, and that, some of that money has been used for, the designs to get the permits and everything, to get it done. So that's what we're working with. And that $2.2 million came through legislatively mandated, came through the Department of Natural Resources. Part of it under the State Lakes Protection and Restoration Fund. So.
All right.
Very nice presentation.
Oh, we got one more. Sorry.
Questions for that? Wait.
Is for the sediment that's removed, is there going to be anything to reestablish the original channel of Arrowhead Run? Or is it just going to be like kind of a uniform removal?
It's mostly your uniform removal. We expect that that'll channelize a little bit on its own as it washes through there, but it's mostly just a flat bottom at this point. There may be a slight tier depending on the volume that we're awarded, but it's basically a flat bottom in there.
Yeah, obviously, especially during the springtime when you have the spring freshet coming through and a lot more water coming through.
Just one question, I'm kind of curious, we all know like prices have went up considerably over the past few years, probably since this money was allocated. What if it comes in at like double? What if your bid is double? Would you scale back the amount of dredging, or would you walk away from the project? Like, what was the contingency plan?
So we knew that going in, that was gonna be a little bit of a risk, particularly from when it was originally estimated to where we're at now. The way the bid was structured is we want 15,000 yards. That's what we'd really like to get. But we required all the contractors to bid smaller volume increments so that we can get something that we're kind of guaranteed to be able to complete. So 15,000 yards, I think it was 12 and 9,000 or something. So we're still intending to get a larger volume out there. And the hope is, based on estimates with current data, that we can get at least that minimal smaller volume, to like 9,000 yards or so. If for some reason events occur and it's still significantly over there, then that's going to be an updated conversation and say next steps at that point. So the intent is it's built into the bid right now, and we'll see how they turn out on Friday. All right.
All right. With that, I appreciate everybody's, participation this evening. Some excellent questions. Again, you can check out that website for updates. We'll be continuing to put information on the website about the project. My name and contact information is on that website as well. You can call me directly and I will try to answer it or get the answers for you working with our contractors. So appreciate it. And you all have a good rest of the evening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.